Good morning. This is Dave Jochum, Director of Business and Membership Development for the Longview Chamber of Commerce. I want to welcome you to today's webinar and thank you for taking the time to join us today. A couple of housekeeping items before we jump into things. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available online on our website at longviewchamber.com. For those of you who are with us live on the line today, you'll receive an email later today with a link to listen again to the broadcast and to share it with others. We want you to feel free to share this with anybody you feel like could benefit from this information. We're doing this for our business community, so feel free to share it. A couple of features to make you aware of on this GoToMeeting platform in case you've not been on it before. You'll be muted through the presentation. You'll be able to listen to our presenter and see the visual presentation provided. If you did not see the green title screen at the moment, it's a green and white. Well, it changed there, so it's blue now. But if if you don't see the slides up, then you may need to click on the little flower icon, which is most likely at the bottom of your screen. Sometimes your computer makes you click on that to see the webinar. And then finally, even though you are muted, we do want this to be interactive, and so there's a question section in the box to the right of your screen. You can type in a question along the way at any point during the presentation, and then we'll do our best to answer as many of these questions at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to make use of that. You can also send a message by that means to the organizer if you're having any issues or you're aware of any issues with the broadcast that we might need to tend to. So feel free to use it for that as well. The Longview Chamber of Commerce, right when all of this COVID-19 stuff started and we all had to begin sheltering at home and working from home, we realized that our business community was going to need some vital information and need it fast. And so we started these series of webinars. And while it's been a difficult season, we know that folks are ramping back up. Businesses have begun to open. People are getting back to work. And we're certainly excited about that to see our economy move forward. But as that happens, we know you've got questions, questions that our professional today can help answer. And so with us today, we have Mr. John Hagan. He's an HR attorney who practices nationwide employment law from his office in Allen, Texas. John is board certified in Texas labor and employment law, and he's an award-winning author on many employment law issues. Today, he's going to discuss return to work for your employees, and I'm sure that you've got lots of questions around that issue. So at this time, again, thank you, John, for joining us, and I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Stephanie, for setting this up. Again, like Dave said, my name is John Hagan. I practice out of Allen, which is such a small town. It is a suburb of Dallas. But in any event, this presentation is meant to be a train the trainer presentation, if you will. And what I mean by that is I want you to be able to take this PowerPoint to your employees after you massage it, obviously, for your company and your culture, and present this as we return back to work, or as your employees return back to work. And this is a critical week, this week, next week, and the following week, and perhaps the last week, were critical weeks, or are critical weeks, in that we have a lot of employees returning to work, and they have questions, and they're looking toward you, the business owners, or the managers and supervisors, for the answers to their questions. And hopefully, this presentation will provide lots of answers to those questions that have come up, that will come up, or that maybe you had questions about as well. So I am going to present for about 30 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have some questions, and I'll leave a few minutes left over to answer those questions. So let's go ahead and get started on this. This slide presentation was actually created by the Society of Human Resource Management, and they sent it out to all of their members and allowed everyone to use it. And so I have manipulated it, changed it for this presentation. But if you're a SHRM member, you will recognize this if you had time to take a look at it. So anyway, this presentation, if you're presenting it to your employees, will basically say, welcome back. And here's how we're going to deal with the new normal on COVID-19. Some of our clients are predicting or thinking that there's going to be a second wave of COVID-19. I don't share that opinion, and I certainly hope that we don't have a second wave. But they are asking for this type of information, so when they get the questions from their employees, they have at least some sort of response. So this would be a welcome back slide that you would present to your employees. And I would go through and tell them that what we are doing as the employer and so you would take these bullet points and present those to your employees. And then we've got a few questions afterwards in bold for you guys to answer in the presentation about exactly how, why, and what you are doing. First bullet point, all employees and visitors entering our buildings will be screened for COVID-19 symptoms and possible exposure. So we want to detail how we're going to do that. Number one, we may be doing temperature checks. Number two, we'll ask a battery of questions before they come in. Number one, do you have COVID-19? Number two, do you have a fever? Number three, have you experienced any of the symptoms of COVID-19? Number four, have you been exposed to anyone who is either has contracted COVID-19 or who may have been exposed to COVID-19? We represent a lot of financial institutions, and a customer at a bank in El Paso recently called into us and said, "Hey, I was at your bank on Tuesday, and I have just found out today on Thursday that I've contracted COVID-19. And so I wanted to let you know that I dealt with 3 people there on Tuesday. And so the VP of HR, he and I talked about it yesterday. And so what we've decided to do is to quarantine those 3 employees and obviously make a note to them and let everybody else know, what is going on in that El Paso branch of this bank. And then we take follow-up cleaning procedures just to make sure that everything is going to work out. And even though these were tellers and they cannot perform their work at home, under the Family First Act, the bank is entitled to receive money in order to pay these 3 employees their full wages for the entire 14 days, as long as they've been with the bank for at least 30 days. I think that's one of the rules in there. But I would encourage you to take this slide and edit it to make it fit your situation in your workplace and with your workplace's culture. And if you have any questions about some of the questions that I've posed on this slide, please let me know at the end of my presentation. So next slide this is a slide about what your employees can do to help stop the spread of COVID-19. I think we're all very familiar with all of these, but it's important that you present these bullet points either in a presentation or in some type of written form, because there's already been a bunch of lawsuits filed against employers for not taking these precautions. And if you do take these precautions and you document it and you present it to the employee, this slide and the previous slide, then employers can gain what's called a safe harbor, in that you will, if somebody sues you, you will be presumed innocent of neglect or intentionally ignoring all of these warning signs and remedies that you can use to address COVID-19 in the workplace. And it's a good tool for you to use these, as far as I'm concerned, as an employment law lawyer or an HR attorney, because if you use these, then I can use this in the defense of any threatened lawsuits or, God forbid, an actual lawsuit. And we'll certainly receive the threat before we receive the lawsuit. That's the way plaintiffs' attorneys work, mostly in Texas. And I've had a great deal of experience with the plaintiffs' attorneys in East Texas, um, in Longview and Kilgore. And so I'm very familiar with their practices. So, but outside the legal liability, you don't want your employees getting sick. And you certainly don't want anybody to pass away, um, who works for you. And so this is the humanitarian reason for presenting this. By the way, um, thank goodness we don't live in California. The state legislature there has proposed a bill. Hopefully, it won't pass. It basically says that for some employers, if an employee contracts COVID-19 and has returned to work, it's automatically presumed that the employer is at fault and is guilty for causing that employee to contract COVID-19. And the result of that is, unfortunately, that COVID-19 will not be treated with personal health insurance, but it'll go through workers' comp in California, which is a nightmare for employers and employees. But it also sets up a legal presumption that the employer is guilty until proven innocent of forcing the employee back to work, and as a result, the employee contracting COVID-19. So let's talk about some frequently asked questions that pop up from your employees, or questions that you may have as well. Number one, can I continue to work from home? And the default through all of COVID-19 is we really want you working where you worked before. And we will make exceptions for under the Families First Act, um, where someone is taking care of children whose daycare or schools have been closed down, or if they've contracted COVID-19, if they're waiting on results of a COVID-19 test and they have experienced symptoms. All of that list is out there. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to ask Dave and Stephanie to pass on a little cheat sheet we put together that will help you with the Families First Act side of the COVID-19. And it's really nice and concise, and it'll help you. Hang on a second. Let me put that on my to-do list. Okay. And so another question you're going to get or have already received is it safe to return back to work? You can't answer that yes or no, but under Texas law, as an employer, you are not considered the insurer of safety in the workplace. You have to do what is reasonably foreseeable in order to avoid liability for some type of on the job accident, disease, COVID-19 virus, things like that. So you're not the absolute insurer, but you do have to take reasonable steps to address anything that may be foreseeable. What is foreseeable with COVID-19? Well, we know what is foreseeable because it's human contact with each other, it's the lack of social distancing, all of those buzzwords that we have now become part of our lexicon in the new normal. And so by making this presentation to your employees, you are telling them, and you can tell them this directly, that we are taking every precaution that we know of to protect you in the workplace and to make the workplace as safe as possible. And when you combine that with the knowledge that you are not the insurer, the ultimate insurer of all employees' safety, then I think if you will take these steps and make this presentation either online, in person, or through some type of written notification to your employees, I think you can feel very confident about returning your employees back to the workplace. So I don't know if this is a problem so much in Texas, but you may get the question about what if I can't return to work? This question pops up because some people in larger cities use mass transit in order to get to work, and they don't feel comfortable using that mass transit. And I don't blame them. I think that's where a lot of this stuff happened in the subways of New York and why New York City is suffering so much. But if they can't get to work, if they bring up this question, then I would say, okay, well, let's figure out a way for you to be able to get to work that is basically of your own choosing. Get a friend, get a family member, Uber, Lyft. If there is some mass transit, which there is none here in Allen, um, they can't take advantage of that, obviously. But um, you just want to kind of work it out with them. But remember that getting to work is an essential function of everyone's job. They've got to be able to place themselves physically in a location where they can do the work, whether that's at home or that is in the office. And our default is always you need to be in the office, you need to be out in the field with customers, you need to go to customer sites, wherever the workplace is. That's our default, and we make exceptions for COVID-19. But remember, the default is you need to return to the place where you've always worked, unless the company says, you know what, this remote working is really working out great, and maybe we want to continue it 3 or 4 days a week for some of the employees. But as far as this question on how do I get to work, you can see that some employees may take advantage of this and say, I can't get to work for another month because I depend upon a family member to help me, and that family member is down with COVID-19 right now, or is somehow otherwise incapacitated. And that may be a true statement, but for some employees, in my experience, that will not be a true statement. And so they'll just be using it to work from home, and you'll be noticing that their performance is not that great or has fallen off while working from home. And so we have to address that as well. And so, as a business owner, as a manager, as an HR professional, we get to make the judgment calls on whether or not they are meeting the essential functions of their job and doing their job. And so, one of the accommodations we could make for them is we need you to come in the office and take advantage of all of the resources that are here so that you can perform the essential functions of your job. Because if you don't, then you're on the road to progressive discipline, which may ultimately end up in termination. And nobody wants that. So, next question, how will staggered work shifts impact me? A lot of our clients are staggering employees by having some come in the office or come into the workplace on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and then having them work from home on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so if any of y'all are using staggered work weeks or staggered shifting, then I would make sure that you explain that up front to the employees so that they get the buy-in to it too. I think this is more of a morale and employee retention issue than it is a legal issue. But I think it's always best to let your employees know what's going on or what the plans are, especially if it impacts them. You probably already got this next question coming up. Am I going to have to answer any medical questions when reporting to work? The answer to that is yes. If you, as the business owner, manager, HR professional, want to do that. The EEOC has been very clear that we can ask a battery of questions to employees who are returning to work. Do you have COVID-19? Have you been exposed to it? Are you seeking medical care and awaiting a COVID-19 test result? Things like that. You can do that. Obviously, we can scan for temperatures. There's a lot that we can do to protect the workplace. And of course, if we get a negative answer to these questions, then we immediately quarantine the employee and then send them home for the 14 days. This next question goes hand in hand with that. What should I do if I feel sick? Well, you go home immediately and you go check with your doctor or go get a COVID-19 test. Let us know the results as soon as possible. If you can work from home, great. If you can't, well, then that might fall into that 14-day period under the Family First Act, the FFA, where we would go ahead and pay them and get reimbursed for that payment from the federal government. So, next question, do I have to wear a mask at work? Currently, under Texas and local law, and also federal law, no, you don't have to do that, but you're certainly welcome to if you want. And if the employer, the business owner, wants to require that, then yes, you can require it. You have every legal right to require it, or you have every legal right to allow the employees to make their own choice on this. So here in our office, we've got a lot of people, and we're not wearing masks except for the receptionist and anybody who has to hand off or touch packages or mail in that situation. But otherwise, we've been very fortunate here in Collin County to have a very low census of COVID-19 cases and deaths as well. So it's not as impactful here as it is in other places. And from the stats that I looked at, it appears that East Texas is doing pretty well on those results as well. So next question, will we continue to have in-person meetings? The answer to that is yes, or yes when we decide that we're going to have those in-person meetings, but we're going to continue to follow the social distancing rules that were in the first slide of this presentation so that you can feel comfortable walking into a conference room and seeing that everybody's spaced out, may have masks, may have gloves, and we're going to conduct the meetings that way. But if you're just as happy conducting these meetings by GoToMeeting or WebEx or Zoom, then yes, you can do that as well, but you're not required to. Okay, next slide. Hang on. So the next slide, as soon as it comes up, I'm sorry, my computer is having a problem. Dave or Stephanie, if y'all are on and can hear me, if you can advance. Oh, there we go. I think this skipped a slide. No, it didn't. So how will positive cases of COVID-19 be handled in the workplace? And we answer just the way that everybody else is handling. We send the employee home. We notify the other employees who had a possibility of coming in contact with this employee that they need to go get tested. Perhaps you may want to send them home as well, especially if they can work from home. That would be great. And so when you send them home, this is for the 2 weeks, the 14-day inoculation period, or isolation period, excuse me, that is being recommended by the CDC. Okay, so if you send somebody home, do they have to continue to pay their health premiums during this time? And unless, if they are paying it before COVID-19, yes, they will continue to have that obligation. You may suspend that obligation and wait for them to come back and pay it in a lump sum or under some sort of extra deduction that you're taking out of their pay. If you're going to do the extra deduction, you need to get a separate authorization from the employee to do that. Texas law does not allow us to deduct from a paycheck for all but 3 or 4 reasons. And of course, health insurance is one of them. But if we're going to ask them to catch up, then that would require a separate authorization from the employee. Okay, and for some of us, we may be seeing these changes in the workplace. These are some of the things that we've instituted here in our law firm, but automatic doors so that you don't have to touch the doors, the smartphone apps for time clock entries. If you have a robust enough payroll system to allow that, we don't, but we're considering it. I would emphasize that we switch to that as soon as possible. Motion sensor lighting, of course, so that you don't have to touch the light switch, the body temperature scans, and voice activated elevator and intercom buttons, again, so that you don't have to have that physical touch there. So I'd like to address any questions that came up, if any.
All right. John, thank you so much for all of that information. I feel like you probably answered many of the questions that people would have. We do have one. And so I just want to remind everybody first of a couple things. One, there's still opportunity to ask a question. So hurry up and get it typed in there. And then also we want to make sure you're aware of the PDF of John's presentation that's available to you. You should see that again on the right side of your screen under handouts. But otherwise, we also will be emailing that out to those who are on the call today. So one question, John, for businesses that entertain the public, people coming in and out, how susceptible might they be to lawsuits, and what can they do to protect themselves?
Those who entertain the public are probably the most susceptible outside of healthcare to getting a lawsuit. And so, number one, you want to follow CDC guidelines, um, what Governor Abbott is allowing, and then whatever your local county or municipality limits that have been placed on you. If you do those 3 things, then you are doing everything foreseeable to mitigate the COVID-19 or the spread of COVID-19. And so you are not only decreasing the chance of a successful lawsuit against your business that entertains the public, um, you are confining or you are protecting yourself against your employees and against the general public by doing that, because the lawsuits or litigation or legal liability can come from the public and your employees as well. And so if you're doing all of those things and putting up posters, there's tons of resources for posters, and we see them already, and you've probably already got those up, whomever asked this question. As long as you're doing everything that is reasonably necessary to avoid foreseeable consequences of COVID-19, then in most Texas courts, not every Texas court, but in most Texas courts, you will be exonerated. And hopefully you won't be sued at all for these type of things. So for example, that customer that came into the bank in El Paso, when the VP of HR was telling me about this yesterday, I thought this was going to turn into a customer lawsuit against the bank. But no, the customer was being the good Samaritan and just helping the bank contain COVID-19 within within the employee pool, and we were very grateful for that. And so, if you're entertaining the public, unless you're doing it online like Live Nation, you have more exposure to legal liability, like my bank client, than someone like IBM or General Motors, something like that.
Okay, good. So basically, do your best to follow the guidelines that are in place in your area. And if you're doing that and you can show that you're doing that, then you're going to be pretty well protected from any lawsuits.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right. And even if you're doing things behind the scenes, document that. Have a written documentation of what you are doing behind the scenes, even though employees or customers or the general public may not see that. And the reason that you want to do that is to have that documentation. I know it's a hassle. You've got a million things you're already doing thanks to COVID-19 and just regularly running your business, is that a jury will always believe the written word over the spoken word. If there's a he said, she said, and a jury cannot tell who is telling the truth, if you can produce a document that was written at the same time you were carrying out these actions behind the scenes, they will buy into that document 99 times out of 100. And so I always stress documentation, documentation. Hopefully you'll never need it, but if you do, you're going to be so glad that you documented what you have been doing.
So a simple example of that would be in our case here at the Longview Chamber, we emailed our cleaning company and said, we'd like for you to step up our cleaning each night in these ways. And we specifically asked them to make sure they were wiping down handles, wiping down phone receivers, and all those type of things. And so that documentation would be a help to us if we had to produce something that we had taken that step.
Absolutely. Um, I love that, Dave, and I would encourage you to advertise that to your employees and to the general public if you get many walk-ins when it comes to something like that. I think that is a great way to uh, respond to the pandemic as well as protecting the chamber from legal liability. It's just a win-win-win situation.
Right. Well, super. This is again, John, has been some great information. So we really appreciate it. So I want to thank you again for taking time from your busy schedule to help us think through these things and to get these questions answered that are in our minds, but we don't always have a person to go to get them answered. To the folks listening, again, on behalf of the Longview Chamber of Commerce, we very much appreciate your participation. And as a reminder, we are recording this. It'll be available on our website at longviewchamber.com. And like I said earlier, you'll also receive an email if you're listening to this call live. You'll get the email later today with the link to be able to listen again or share it with others. So again, thanks for joining us. Thanks again, John. Appreciate your time. Everyone, have a great day.
Thank you, Dave.